Something has changed about American food, and you know it. The United States has the most abundant food supply in human history, and yet over 73% of American adults are overweight or obese. More than 1 in 3 adults are pre-diabetic. Childhood food allergies have increased over 50% in a generation, and ultra-processed products now make up nearly 60% of the average American diet. That's not a coincidence. That's a system shift. The food looks brighter, lasts longer, tastes stronger, but something about it feels off. Bread doesn't mold the way it used to. Fruit lasts for weeks without breaking down. Chicken pulls apart in ways that don't look natural. And while we're eating more calories than ever before, nutrient density in key crops has declined compared to mid-20th century levels. This isn't nostalgia. It's measurable. It's structural. And if you felt more inflamed, more bloated, more tired even while trying to eat healthy, you're not imagining it. The American food system has changed dramatically in the last 30 to 40 years, and most people never got the memo. Today, we're going to break down exactly what shifted, why it happened, and what it actually means for you. Food no longer behaves like food, and that's not a metaphor. Let me start here because this is usually the first thing people notice, even before labels, chemicals, or supply chains enter the conversation. Food in the United States does not behave the way food historically behaves. It doesn't rot on schedule. It doesn't break down naturally. It doesn't respond to time, air, water, or bacteria the way it used to. And the reason that matters is because spoilage is not a flaw in food. Spoilage is a biological signal that life has ended, and microbes are reclaiming nutrients. When bread resists mold for months, when meat maintains color far beyond its slaughter date, when fruit shrivels instead of decomposing, that's not freshness, that's chemical stability. And we have data on this. The USDA itself allows over 3,000 direct food additives, many of which exist solely to extend shelf life, prevent microbial growth, stabilize texture, or preserve color. Calcium propionate in bread inhibits mold growth by disrupting fungal metabolism. Sodium erythorbate and sodium nitrite in meat don't just preserve color, they actively suppress oxidation that would normally signal decay. Even produce is now commonly treated with post-harvest fungicides, like imazalil and thiabendazole, which are applied after harvesting to prevent mold during shipping and storage. That's why apples can sit untouched for weeks, sometimes months. According to UC Davis research, store-bought apples are often 6 to 12 months old before they ever reach a shelf. And when you rinse them underwater and nothing changes, no softening, no breakdown, that's because water isn't interacting with organic matter the way it should. Compare that to older bread formulas or bread in countries with fewer preservatives. Water penetrates, starch dissolves, yeast structures collapse. In the U.S., bread increasingly relies on emulsifiers like datem and mono and diglycerides that give it elasticity and water resistance. That rubbery texture people keep noticing? That's engineered resilience. And here's the unsettling part. These technologies weren't designed with digestion as the priority. They were designed for logistics, long-haul transport, warehouse storage, and inventory turnover. So when you look at food that doesn't mold, doesn't dissolve, doesn't attract insects or animals, the uncomfortable truth is this. Biologically speaking, it's drifting further away from being food and closer to being an industrial input. And your gut, which relies on fermentation, breakdown, and microbial interaction, knows it, even if you haven't fully articulated it yet. The scale of food production has quietly broken natural time. Now zoom out with me for a second, because even if you ignore ingredients and chemicals, there's a deeper issue that doesn't get talked about enough. The volume of food moving through the American system no longer aligns with natural biological cycles. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The United States produces and distributes food at a pace that far exceeds what soil regeneration, animal growth, and seasonal harvesting would normally allow. Just one example. The average Costco location moves over $200 million worth of goods per year, much of it perishable food, and there are over 600 Costco warehouses globally. That's not counting Walmart, Kroger, Aldi, Target, Sam's Club, regional chains, or convenience stores. According to the FDA, the U.S. food system processes roughly 42 billion pounds of meat annually, including beef, poultry, and pork. For poultry alone, the average chicken reaches slaughter weight in 6 to 7 weeks, compared to 12 to 16 weeks in the 1950s. That growth acceleration isn't coming from better sunlight or happier farms. It's coming from selective breeding, high-energy feed formulas, growth-optimized genetics, and tightly controlled environments. And plants follow a similar pattern. Modern commercial produce is bred for yield, uniformity, and shipping durability, not nutrient density. Studies published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition show measurable declines in magnesium, zinc, iron, and vitamin C in fruits and vegetables compared to mid-20th century samples. Faster growth means less time to accumulate micronutrients. And then there's the logistics problem no one wants to touch. Food is constantly replenished. Shelves empty and refill in hours. Pallets replace pallets. Cold storage facilities operate 24/7. This requires an agricultural system that behaves less like nature and more like manufacturing. Continuous output, predictable units, minimal variability. That's why you're sensing something is off, because biologically nothing works like that. Soil needs rest. Animals need time. Ecosystems need recovery. When a system removes those pauses, it doesn't just stress the environment, it changes the product. And that's why people are feeling full but undernourished, bloated but unsatisfied, fed but not energized. The food technically exists, calories are present, but the biological rhythm has been stripped out. And once food loses its rhythm, your body has to compensate. That's not paranoia, that's physiology trying to adapt to a system moving faster than nature ever intended. The ingredient lists are getting longer, but the nutrition is getting thinner. While grocery store shelves are expanding and ingredient lists are getting longer, the actual nutritional density of American food has been steadily declining. And that's not opinion, that's measurable. Multiple long-term analyses comparing USDA nutrient composition data from the 1950s to the early 2000s show significant drops in key micronutrients like calcium, iron, phosphorus, riboflavin, and vitamin C across dozens of crops. A landmark study from the University of Texas found statistically significant declines in 6 out of 13 nutrients in fruits and vegetables over a 50-year period. And that's before we even get into soil depletion. Roughly 1/3 of the world's topsoil has been lost in the last century due to industrial farming practices, according to the FAO. And when soil loses microbial diversity and mineral density, crops grow, but they don't carry the same nutritional payload. So what happens? Food manufacturers compensate. They fortify, they enrich, they add back synthetic vitamins. That's why you see things like enriched wheat flour on nearly every bread label. The natural nutrients were stripped during processing, so synthetic folic acid and iron are added in controlled amounts afterward. But synthetic vitamins don't always behave the same way in the body as food-bound nutrients. Folic acid, for example, requires conversion in the liver to become metabolically active, and a growing body of research suggests unmetabolized folic acid can accumulate in the bloodstream. That's not a conspiracy, that's biochemistry. And here's where you start to feel the shift. You can eat 2,500 calories today and still feel undernourished. You can snack constantly and still crave something. Because your body isn't just looking for calories, it's looking for magnesium, potassium, trace minerals, phytonutrients, fiber diversity. And modern ultra-processed foods now account for over 57% of total caloric intake in the United States, according to NIH-backed research. These foods are engineered for hyperpalatability, the perfect ratio of salt, sugar, and fat to stimulate dopamine release. But they often contain stripped-down macronutrients with minimal micronutrient complexity. So when you say, something feels off, what you might actually be feeling is a subtle but chronic micronutrient deficit masked by caloric abundance. The packaging looks brighter, the flavors are stronger, the convenience is greater. But beneath that, the nutritional floor has quietly lowered, and your body knows the difference, even if the label tells you it's fortified. The rise of synthetic biology is quietly entering the food chain. Now this next shift is more recent. And it's one that most people haven't fully processed yet: the integration of synthetic biology directly into food production. We're no longer just talking about preservatives or pesticides. We're talking about genetically engineered enzymes, lab-derived proteins, and precision fermentation entering the mainstream food supply. For example, rennet, the enzyme used to coagulate cheese, was historically sourced from the stomach lining of calves. Today, the majority of rennet used in American cheese production is produced through genetically modified microorganisms, often bacteria or fungi engineered to produce the same enzyme in fermentation tanks. This isn't hidden, it's called fermentation-produced chymosin, and it's widely used because it's cheaper and scalable. But it represents a structural shift. Food components that used to be biological byproducts are now lab-optimized outputs. And this extends beyond cheese. Impossible Foods and other plant-based meat companies use genetically engineered yeast to produce soy legumoglobin, the molecule that makes their product bleed. Precision fermentation companies are developing dairy proteins without cow's casein and whey synthesized through microbial systems. In 2023 and 2024, the FDA continued expanding approvals for lab-grown meat production in the United States, with cultivated chicken receiving regulatory clearance for limited sale. Now step back. You are witnessing the early-stage transition from agriculture to biomanufacturing. That's not inherently evil. Technology always enters food systems. But here's the critical point. Long-term human consumption data on many of these compounds simply does not exist at generational scale. These are recent integrations. Meanwhile, pesticide usage hasn't disappeared. Glyphosate remains one of the most widely used herbicides in American agriculture, with hundreds of millions of pounds applied annually. Even when residue levels fall within regulatory limits, cumulative exposure patterns are still debated in scientific circles. So when consumers feel uneasy, when they sense that labels are harder to decode, that ingredients sound more industrial than agricultural, it's because the food system has fundamentally shifted from growing to engineering. We've moved from farms dominating the equation to labs playing a growing role. And whether you view that as innovation or risk, one thing is undeniable. The distance between soil and plate has widened. And the further food drifts from its original biological context, the more your intuition starts to whisper that something has changed. Because it has. Food is engineered for shelf life, not for digestion. One of the biggest changes most people never consciously notice but feel every day is that modern American food is no longer designed with digestion as the primary goal. It's designed for stability. Stability on trucks, stability in warehouses, stability under fluorescent lights, stability through temperature swings. And when you optimize for stability, you inevitably sacrifice biological compatibility. Take emulsifiers, for example. These are compounds added to keep ingredients from separating, improve texture, and extend shelf life. Sounds harmless, right? Except recent studies published in journals like Nature and Gut have linked common emulsifiers, such as carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80, to disruptions in gut microbiota and increased intestinal inflammation in animal models. Your gut lining evolved to interact with whole foods, fibers, and naturally occurring fats, not chemically stabilized mixtures engineered to resist separation. Then there are modified starches, which are altered to withstand heat, freezing, or acidity. These starches don't always break down the same way during digestion, and they can bypass normal enzymatic processes, leading to bloating, sluggishness, and altered blood sugar responses. And here's the thing. People often blame themselves. Maybe I'm just sensitive. Maybe I'm getting older. But population-wide digestive complaints have skyrocketed. IBS diagnoses, acid reflux, chronic bloating all up dramatically over the past 2 decades. That's not a coincidence. It tracks almost perfectly with the rise of ultra-processed foods and functional additives. Even protein behaves differently now. Modern poultry is bred for rapid muscle growth, often leading to altered muscle fiber structure. That stringy, oddly separable chicken texture people keep noticing? It's associated with conditions like woody breast, a muscle disorder linked to accelerated growth rates. And while it's deemed safe, it changes how protein breaks down during digestion. So when you eat and feel heavy, inflamed, tired, that's not weakness. That's your digestive system interacting with food that was optimized for commerce, not physiology. And once you understand that, a lot of things suddenly make sense. Regulation has shifted from prevention to permission. Here's another uncomfortable truth. The way food is regulated in the United States has fundamentally changed in philosophy. It's no longer about proving something is safe before it enters the food supply, it's increasingly about removing it after harm becomes undeniable. The FDA operates under a framework known as GRAS, or generally recognized as safe. On paper, that sounds reassuring. In practice, it allows companies to self-certify ingredients as safe without mandatory long-term independent testing, as long as there's reasonable certainty among experts, often industry-linked experts. Thousands of food chemicals entered the U.S. supply this way. Meanwhile, the European Union follows a precautionary principle. If long-term safety is unclear, approval is delayed or denied. That's why hundreds of additives legal in the U.S. are banned or restricted overseas. Artificial dyes like Red 40 and Yellow 5? Still common here. Potassium bromate in bread? Allowed here, banned elsewhere. Certain preservatives? Same story. And when something is flagged in the U.S., it often takes years, sometimes decades to remove. During that time, exposure continues. Now, layer on corporate consolidation. Just a handful of companies control the majority of processed food brands in America. When regulatory agencies rely on industry-submitted data, and the industry is highly consolidated, the feedback loop tightens. This doesn't require malice to be problematic, just incentives. Profit pressures reward cheaper inputs, longer shelf life, faster production. And when consumers start noticing changes, the system doesn't slow down, it explains them away. It's still within limits. It's still approved. But biological systems don't respond to paperwork. They respond to cumulative exposure. And that's why trust is eroding. People aren't suddenly paranoid. They're responding to a system that feels less protective and more permissive than it used to. Your body is becoming the canary in the food system. This is where it all comes together. Because when systems change faster than biology can adapt, the body becomes the warning signal. Chronic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, food sensitivities that didn't exist a generation ago, childhood allergies at historic highs. According to the CDC, food allergies in children increased by over 50% between the late 1990s and 2010s. Autoimmune diseases are rising globally, with the U.S. among the highest rates. And while genetics don't change that fast, environments do. The modern American diet exposes the immune system to novel proteins, chemical residues, altered fats, synthetic additives, and reduced microbial diversity all at once. Your immune system evolved to distinguish food from threat. When food becomes unfamiliar at a molecular level, that distinction blurs. And here's the quiet part. No one likes to say out loud. Many people don't feel healthy anymore. They feel managed. Managed symptoms, managed energy, managed digestion, supplements to compensate, medications to suppress signals. That's not resilience, that's adaptation under strain. And it's why people are gravitating toward farmers' markets, home gardens, sourdough starters, raw ingredients, and short supply chains. Not because it's trendy, but because their bodies respond differently. Faster satiety, better digestion, clearer energy. You don't need a lab to feel that difference, you feel it when food actually turns into fuel instead of friction. And once you feel that contrast, it becomes very hard to ignore the conclusion that something fundamental has shifted. Not overnight, not conspiratorially, but gradually, systemically, and now unmistakably. The distance between you and your food has never been greater. One of the most profound changes in the American food system isn't something you can taste or see on a label. It's the sheer distance, both physical and informational, between you and the source of what you're eating. 100 years ago, most Americans lived within a short radius of where their food was grown, raised, or processed. Even if you didn't farm yourself, you knew someone who did. You knew the seasonality. You knew when things ran out. Today, The average American meal contains ingredients that have traveled over 1,500 miles before reaching your plate. That distance isn't just geographic, it's relational. Food now passes through multiple layers of processing, packaging, storage, and transport before it ever reaches you. Each layer introduces interventions: preservatives to survive transit, coatings to maintain appearance, gases to slow ripening, stabilizers to prevent separation. Controlled atmosphere storage can keep produce fresh for months by reducing oxygen and increasing carbon dioxide, essentially putting food into a suspended metabolic state. That's technologically impressive, but biologically unnatural. And the further food travels, the more it must be modified to endure the journey. Meanwhile, transparency hasn't kept pace. Labels list ingredients, but they don't tell you how those ingredients were grown, sprayed, processed, or stored. Natural flavors can legally represent hundreds of compounds. Product of labels often reflect the final packaging location, not the origin of raw materials. And so you're left trusting a system you can't see, touch, or verify. That erosion of trust matters. Humans evolved alongside their food sources. Our digestion, immune systems, and even gut-brain signaling developed in constant feedback with what we consumed. When that relationship becomes abstract, when food becomes anonymous, the feedback loop breaks. And that's why people are increasingly uneasy. It's not nostalgia, it's instinct. When the chain between soil and stomach stretches too far, your body starts asking questions long before your mind does. Convenience has quietly replaced nourishment as the primary goal. Now here's the hard one to swallow, because it implicates all of us. The modern American food system is no longer built primarily around nourishment. It's built around convenience, speed, portability, uniformity, minimal preparation. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it accelerated dramatically over the last 40 years as dual-income households increased, food preparation time collapsed, and corporations raced to meet demand for ready-to-eat solutions. According to USDA data, the average American now spends less than 30 minutes per day preparing food, down from over an hour in the 1960s. That time had to be made up somewhere, and it was made up in factories. Ultra-processed foods are pre-cooked, pre-seasoned, pre-stabilized, and pre-digested, in a sense, engineered to deliver immediate sensory satisfaction with minimal effort. But when convenience becomes the dominant design constraint, trade-offs are inevitable. Fiber complexity decreases, fermentation disappears, food structure simplifies. The gut microbiome, which thrives on diversity and slow digestion, gets fewer signals to maintain balance. And over time, the body adapts to what it's given. Taste thresholds rise, whole foods feel bland, cooking feels like a burden. Meanwhile, rates of metabolic dysfunction climb. The U.S. now leads much of the world in obesity, type 2 diabetes, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, conditions deeply tied to dietary patterns. And yet, people don't feel like they're overeating. They feel like they're surviving their schedules. That's the quiet tragedy of convenience culture. It solves short-term friction at the cost of long-term resilience. Food becomes something to get through, not something that sustains. And once nourishment stops being the core objective, the system inevitably drifts away from health, not because anyone planned it, but because efficiency always wins unless nourishment is intentionally protected. The system isn't just feeding you anymore, it's programming you. And here's where this all lands: not in one ingredient, not in one chemical, not in one conspiracy theory, but in something much bigger. The American food system has quietly shifted from simply feeding the population to shaping behavior at scale. That sounds dramatic, but stay with me. Modern food science is deeply intertwined with neuroscience. Major food corporations employ behavioral scientists and flavor chemists whose job is not just to make food taste good, but to make it craveable, repeatable, and habit-forming. The term bliss point, popularized in food industry research, refers to the precise combination of sugar, fat, and salt that maximizes dopamine release in the brain. It's measurable, it's testable, it's engineered. When you hit that bliss point, your brain doesn't just enjoy the food, it remembers it and seeks it out again. That's not nourishment. That's stimulus response conditioning. And this matters because over 60% of the American diet now comes from ultra-processed foods designed with this exact principle in mind. Hyperpalatable foods override satiety signals. They compress flavor intensity while reducing chewing time, which decreases the body's natural feedback loops that tell you when to stop eating. Meanwhile, portion sizes have expanded dramatically over the past few decades. A soda that was once 8 ounces is now 20, 30, even 44 ounces. But it doesn't feel outrageous because the system has normalized escalation. And here's the deeper layer. When food becomes predictable, optimized stimulation, it doesn't just affect your waistline, it affects mood, energy cycles, and attention patterns. Blood sugar spikes and crashes influence cognitive performance. Chronic low-grade inflammation influences brain fog and emotional regulation. Emerging research continues exploring the gut-brain axis, the reality that your microbiome communicates directly with your nervous system. When your microbiome diversity declines, which has been documented in Western dietary patterns, mental health markers often shift alongside it. So when people say, something has changed about our food, what they're often describing is not just texture or shelf life, they're describing how it makes them feel afterward. Wired but tired, full but unsatisfied, stimulated but not nourished. The system now optimizes for engagement, not restoration. And once you recognize that shift, once you see that food is no longer just fuel, but a carefully engineered input shaping consumption habits, it becomes very hard to go back to autopilot eating. Because deep down, you already know something has changed, and your body has been trying to tell you for a while. Let me leave you with this. If food is information, and biologically it is then what you eat every single day is not just building your body, it's programming it. And right now, over half of what the average American consumes isn't whole food. It's ultra-processed formulations engineered for shelf life, repeat purchases, and neurological reward. Chronic disease is exploding. Metabolic dysfunction is becoming normal. Kids are developing conditions that used to show up in late adulthood. And we keep being told this is just genetics, just aging, just bad luck. But genetics don't change in 30 years. Food systems do. Something has shifted. Not dramatically overnight, but quietly, gradually, structurally. And the scariest part isn't that the system changed. It's that most people are adapting to it without realizing it. Lower energy becomes normal. Digestive issues become normal. Inflammation becomes normal. Being slightly unwell becomes the baseline. And once a population accepts that baseline, the system never has to correct itself. So the real question isn't, is the food different? It's this. How long are you going to ignore what your own body has been trying to tell you? Because once you see it, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where everything starts to change.